Good morning, your name is Pat Johnson. You're the son of a farmer in northern Delaware. You're currently 16 years old, and the date is March 1777. The world, country, and lifestyle you live is much different to the present day, and together we'll explore the world of revolutionary America and what it was like to serve in the Continental Army. At the time of the Revolution, the Continental Army, or the United States Army, was a ragtag group of varying people, ranging from aristocrats, criminals, freed slaves, natives, to working-class citizens. For as dramatized and glorified as the Revolutionary Army is seen today, in reality, it was far from ideal. For many people serving in the Continental Army, it was because of a lack of better options, or in the promise of free land. There were a lot of ups and downs to the Revolutionary Army we'll go over today. As the son of a farmer from Delaware, you're generally expected to be self-sufficient, capable of hard labor, and tough working conditions, though thankfully, you wouldn't be the only farmer's son in the Army. You currently are stationed at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. You serve under General George Washington. Though while Washington has supreme authority over the command of the Army, his ability to persuade soldiers to carry out his orders is tenuous. Many soldiers in the Continental Army, including you, see no reason to listen or obey George Washington, as no soldiers elected him to the position of general. Instead, you listen to your regiment commanders, who are democratically elected, and typically follow the orders of the general. Life in the Army wasn't great, and neither was the pay. To begin with, most soldiers started as privates, including you, and the pay was $75 a month, or about $250 in today's currency. Although the pay didn't always come on time or mean anything. Often soldiers were paid in continental dollars, a currency issued from the earliest United States Congress, which was heavily inflated, with the average hard specie or $1 being equivalent to $270 continental dollars. This low pay was only if you received your pay at all. Many soldiers and officers went months or even years without their full pay, either receiving no pay or only partial payment for their services. This was due to the Congress being cash-strapped nearly all the time, and many states unwilling to supply Congress with funding. Here is a quote from the era, "The paymaster has not a single dollar in hand," General George Washington wrote to the President of the Continental Congress, John Hancock, while conducting the Siege of Boston in 1776. Often, if the Army was unable to pay in dollars, it would pay its soldiers in IOU notes, clothing, weapons, supplies, etc. For you haven't received payment for over 3 months, which isn't too terrible. Your best friend Sam hasn't received payment for 6 months. You get paid in clothing, fabric, and whatever is looted off dead British bodies and encampments. While it may suck to get paid in a blood-stained uniform or blanket, it's better than nothing. If you thought the pay in the Continental Army was bad, the food was likely to be even worse. Keeping food fresh during the 1700s was notoriously difficult, and meats, vegetables, and fish were only able to be kept if it was salted, brined, dried into jerky, or pickled. Though this also meant that for many meals, the food was technically edible but not desirable. As a private, you're the lowest rung of the military, so you'll be receiving the same rations as 90% of your compatriots. Though the actual food supplied may differ, depending on what season it was, the ability to forage for food nearby, or trading donations from local villages and towns. So for instance, in the winter of Delaware in 1778, it's very unlikely you'll receive anything to eat beyond pickled cabbage, hardtack, and salted pork. Today's been a rough day. When a supply wagon was crossing a frozen river, the ice collapsed and sunk many of the supplies with it, along with several horses and men. Many nearby towns and villages are reluctant to provide supplies, in fear of British retaliation. The meager supplies that do make it to your camp are often not enough for the number of soldiers, or poor in quality. You'll find it's very common to find weevils and flies in the flour, and whatever vegetables are brought to camp, though for you it's a little extra protein. Your ration for today will consist of 2 hard-boiled eggs, a loaf of bread, 200 grams of salted pork, and 8 tablespoons of rum. What's most important to you is the rum. When you're given nasty food, fighting freezing conditions and combating enemy soldiers, that rum will be greatly needed. Often the food is incredibly unnutritious, and many soldiers are malnourished because of this. This commonly leads to many soldiers being at risk for disease such as influenza, smallpox, or typhoid. This also weakens many soldiers' bodies, who are already struggling in the cold, often leading to frostbite and amputation of limbs and appendages. The health care for the soldiers was even worse than the food. At this time, basic medical knowledge was limited and was nowhere close to medical professionals of today. The classic remedy for certain illnesses varied, but these are the general outcomes. For coughing, the remedy was a spoonful of molasses. For high blood pressure, the cure was a teaspoon of cinnamon. For venereal disease, either pouring hot water onto the affected area or rubbing a concoction of herbs onto the affected area. For scurvy, the remedy was a mixture of pine needles made into a tea. For fevers, dizziness, vomiting, it was believed the classic remedy was bloodletting, in which blood was extracted from the individual, often believing it will balance out their 4 humors. The 4 humors, made of blood, choler, yellow bile, phlegm, and black bile, were supposed human liquids found in the body that needed to be balanced to keep a person healthy. When someone fell ill or got sick, it was believed one of these humors were out of place. For your revolutionary healthcare, what you would have seen is a physician or an apothecary assistant traveling around, following the army, and setting up camp near or within the soldiers' barracks. Often screaming, crying, and moaning would be heard coming from the doctor's tent, as soldiers suffered lost limbs, eyes, or fingers, with most of these parts having to be amputated. The doctor would have appeared wearing stylish 18th century clothing and a white apron soaked entirely in blood, with doctors regularly cleaning and wiping their medical equipment on their apron instead of disinfecting it through boiling water. It's not uncommon for a soldier to leave the doctor's tent sicker than they came in. With treatments such as bloodletting or molasses, there was little remedies a doctor actually had that successfully cured a patient. Your dentistry would have made modern people faint. The most common dental treatment was to get their patient drunk if liquor was available, and then pull out their teeth, or grind them down. If liquor was not available, the poor sod would have to be held down as the dentist worked quickly to pull out decaying teeth. Luckily for you, though, you're healthy as a ham, and you don't need to visit the doctor at all, though hopefully it stays like this. For clothing, typically only officers and elite soldiers get high-quality or even matching uniforms. Most continental uniforms were unavailable and not distributed evenly. Many patriot militias fighting alongside the Continental Army had no uniforms and wore whatever they wore to church or to work. But thank the Lord, the French have allied themselves with the Americans, alongside the Spanish. Just last week you received a shipment of French uniforms from a man named Lafayette. While you aren't fighting for the French, the blue wool uniform of the French is better than wearing a red uniform of the British. And wearing a blue uniform makes it easier to recognize who your allies are and prevent friendly militias from accidentally shooting at you. Though receiving new uniforms isn't all that glamorous, many soldiers only have pieces to matching uniforms. Rarely do they have the full set. Even then, the uniforms aren't made to deal with the harsh temperature and climate of a North American winter. And many uniforms are cheaply made and fall apart during marches, especially soldiers' socks. To deal with the poor socks, many soldiers wrapped bandages and fabric around their feet to create makeshift socks. Most, if not every soldier, was given a blanket, which was the lifeline to all men. This blanket could be used to be put on the snow before sitting down. It can act as a coat in the freezing snow or rain, and most importantly keeps you warm at night. The daily duties of a soldier varied, but today you're posted on guard duty. While it's a blessing as you get to talk with your fellow soldiers and stand still, it's incredibly boring, and if you fall asleep or slack off while on duty, there are fierce repercussions, such as lashings, pay being withheld, or even worse, your blanket or socks can be taken away, making you suffer the cold, cold nights. For the next 9 hours, you will stare into the woods and daydream of being back home, seeing your longtime love Beatty, and being back home with your father. After your shift of guard duty, you'll help prepare dinner composed of hardtack and salted pork for the rest of the soldiers. Yesterday you all had a fair share of beans, however those have all run out. Following that, you'll play card games with the rest of the soldiers, and drink and smoke. Besides that, there isn't much else. If it wasn't so cold outside, you'd jump into a local stream or river to bathe, but all the water is still frozen, and a jump in the water would leave you with hypothermia. The way you clean yourself is by throwing water on your face, cleaning your hands, and maybe switching out your shirt if possible. Other than that, there is no hygiene to speak of. Camp at Valley Forge was tough, and forged one of America's most famous armies, but was riddled in hardship. Soldiers slept in tents that were often cold, drafty, and had mice running around. Officers slept in log cabins, but these weren't much better, with many being infested with fleas and mice. You get a luxurious tent to yourself, plus your friend Sam, and 2 other men. While it's cramped and cold, you're lucky no mice ever come into your tent. But it does make you wonder why. It's very possible your tent mates may be eating them. Most of the actual combatants in the American Revolution were more tempted by the financial bonuses and free land given by the Continental Congress and respective states. For many farmers and poorer classes of the U.S. colonies, the revolution had little meaning to them. While the Stamp Act did make it notoriously difficult and prohibitively expensive to receive and send documents and conduct financial affairs, this mostly applied to the merchant and upper classes of the colonies. The Continental Congress was mainly dominated by aristocrats, wealthy landowners, and elites of the colonies, who typically were out of touch or ignorant of the plight of the common man. Though following the revolution this would change and become more open to everyday citizens. Personally, as the son of a farmer from Delaware, it means little to you about if you live under British or American authority. At the end of the day, you're still a farmer. Though the promise of liberty, equality, and brotherhood sound tempting, when combined with the actual conditions of the military, the exclusive nature of Congress, and the poor pay these promises often seem unfulfilled. Though for as tough as it was being a revolutionary soldier, many continued to fight for the revolution, as well you. You won't fight in any major battles, but you'll help escort supply wagons and conduct patrols, ensuring the army continues getting fed and is safe. Though it's not as glamorous, your protection ensures the army can continue fighting.